What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more Black Sabbath, and we're returning to the 1970s self-titled album. Thank you again to Han Solo. And I did notice there's an extra track in the folder which doesn't seem to be shown on the master release on Discogs called Wicked World, so I suppose that was a non-album single or maybe a B-side, something to that effect. Either way, we have more than just the official 7 tunes on the album before we move on to the next step. But the next track is called Sleeping Village, which I suppose can go different ways. It could be a sleeping village as in a village where people are literally sleeping at night, and given the atmosphere of the album up to this point, that might sound a bit ominous. It could also be sleeping in a more metaphorical way, like people ignorant of things that might be at hand and thus not prepared to respond or react. Either way, I'll try to catch what I can on a first listen. This is Black Sabbath. The track is Sleeping Village, and it's from their 1970 self-titled album.
Sun rising in the sky, sleeping village, cockles cry, soft breeze blowing in the trees, peace of mind, feel it deep.
short one, so under 4 minutes, which is not a particularly short song, but in the context of what I've heard from them so far, that's definitely on the shorter end. I enjoy the dynamic evolution of the sonics and the rhythms or tempos, meaning we have that almost like ambient style opening with a lot of atmosphere, but the sonics are just sort of waiting to get more intense. And that was the only part with lyrics, which seemed to suggest it's like dawn, like it's a sleeping village, I suppose, at dawn. The cockerel's about to start crowing, and I think there was a reference to the sun coming up at sunrise. So, yeah, it seems to be like just a scene, a moment in time, a snapshot that is being described. And of course, when the sun is coming up, even in, let's say, rural or farming villages, it is still typically the case that most people are sleeping. Nevertheless, the sonics then get heavy and plodding and very, like, weighty, and the drums in particular really stood out in that section, and I should say those sections, because that came back near the end of the tune again, and just these, like, complicated rolls and fills, and it's, not like a simple, just steady rhythm. There's definitely a syncopated, dynamic rhythm, and the drum's very compelling in that regard. But then it launches into this section which gets more up-tempo, and there's a really grooving bass at the foundation of everything, and then blues-style guitar riffs coming over the top of that, with the drums being a bit faster. And then it gets back to that heavy, languid, weighty type of rhythm and configuration as it leads into that outro, which sounds like it plays right into the next tune. So, yeah, ultimately I'll try to come back in the relatively near future to finish off the proper album, and then, as I said, there'll be one more tune after that. So, yeah, like, lyrically, I don't quite know what to make of it, other than it just seems to be setting a scene of a village right at sunrise, when I suppose most people are still sleeping. It still feels a bit ominous given some of the sonics, and that it might be a village that's vulnerable or unaware of what's about to happen. It's a dreamy village, but there's a change in the atmosphere around it. So yes, ultimately I'm not sure if this is something that is part of a larger story. Either way, the sonics, as I said, dynamic, energetic, but also heavy and intense, and very, what's the right word? There's a lot of evolution over the course of the track, different parts, different sections, and all of the instruments standing out at one point or another. As I said, the drums in particular, but also the bass suddenly begins to give this very rapid-fire pulse, and the guitars flourishing blues style over the top of it. So, yeah, a short tune, but a very compelling one. Looking forward to the last track on the proper album, which, in the moment I'm forgetting the name, it's Warning. So, yes, maybe, perhaps, or is it Warming, or Waning? I think it's actually Waning. Let me check on Discogs just to make sure. I think it's Waning here in the folder. No, it's Warning. Oh no, it's Warning here in the folder too. It's just my eyes are, showing my age a little bit as I move into my mid-40s. But yes, Warning is in fact the tune. In any case, shout out once again to Mr. Solo. Let me know what you think, and I will see you next time. Peace.